Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Steve Simon, Minnesota Secretary of State. Thanks a lot for taking the time to be here today. Tomorrow, of course, is Election Day, and this has been and will continue to be an intense election. And there's nothing wrong with that. Elections are supposed to be intense. They're a clash of personalities and visions and backgrounds and all the rest. We just want to make sure that that intensity is channeled in a positive direction and not in a destructive direction. I've said many times over many months that I have two wishes for the 2024 election cycle. Just two. If I could wave a magic wand in this room, I would wish for two things: high turnout and low drama. That's what we want: high turnout and low drama. And one essential component for both of these outcomes is to make sure that Minnesotans have the information they need about our elections. I'm joined today by Acting Elections Director Paul Linnell, Election Security Navigator Bill Ekblad, and Voter Outreach Director Melanie Hazelip. This is the third time we've done an event like this, one each before all three of our statewide elections this year: the presidential nominating primary in March, the regular primary election in August, and then today. So they'll talk about the work they're doing with our many partners across the state to make sure that Minnesotans continue to enjoy elections that are fair, accurate, honest, and secure. Just a quick overview of voting. Tomorrow, Election Day, polling places will be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Every Minnesota voter has the right to reasonable time off of work to vote. You also have the right to vote as long as you are in line by 8 p.m. So if you're there at the polling place by 8 p.m., you are good to go. They have to leave it open long enough to accommodate those who have arrived by 8 p.m. You can find your polling place and you can view a sample ballot of the contests and the candidates who you'll be voting for in your area by going to our website, which is mnvotes.gov. That's mnvotes.gov. Now, in Minnesota, we have a proud tradition of leading the nation in voter turnout. We were number one in America for three of the last four elections, including the last presidential election, which happened, of course, during a once in a century pandemic. And I want to see us get back to number one again this year. Now, as of this morning, 1,174,224 people have already cast a vote in Minnesota. I'll repeat that number. As of this morning, literally right before this event, the number of people who have voted, whose ballots have been accepted, is 1,174,224. We know that there are more than 150,000 ballots outstanding. They're still out there. They've been issued and they have not been turned in yet. Remember, in Minnesota, the rule is that all ballots must be received by election officials by 8 p.m. tomorrow, by the polls closing time. 8 p.m. is the time to get it back. So if you're one of the 150,000 people in Minnesota who is sitting on an absentee ballot, maybe it's lying on your kitchen table right now, you have multiple options. One is to hand deliver it. Obviously, you're not going to mail it today, but one option is to hand deliver it to whoever sent it to you, the county, the city, whoever sent that ballot to you. So you can hand deliver it. The second option is to have someone you know or trust hand deliver it for you, again, by 8 p.m. tomorrow. The third option is to vote in person tomorrow. You don't have to bring the ballot with you to the polling place. In fact, it's best that you don't. But you can go in and vote even if you've been issued an absentee ballot. And here's how and why you can do that. The system tracks who has an outstanding absentee ballot. So when you go into a polling place, you will be entitled to vote in person on election day. But at that very instant, your absentee ballot will be canceled. It will be undone. So no one could swipe it and turn it in and purport to vote in your place. So you have three options: hand deliver it, have someone you know and trust hand deliver it, or you can decide you don't want to vote by absentee. You want to vote on game day in person at your neighborhood polling place. Again, our website is mnvotes.gov. That's where you can find out where your polling place is. I want to say a little bit about polling place expectations tomorrow. We are really fortunate in Minnesota that for years we have had what we like to call oases of calm. I like to use that language. It's language that I'm borrowing from a federal court decision years ago that was describing the ideal polling place as an oasis of calm. And we have had those oases of calm for a long, long time in Minnesota. That's because we have really good and really specific laws in Minnesota about who can be in a polling place and what they can do in a polling place. You're going to hear more about that in a bit from Mr. Ekblad, but I will just remind folks that one of the things that we have in place in Minnesota is a law that says, we want to keep it politics free. We want to keep it free of electioneering and campaigning. And so no one is permitted to go into a polling place wearing political buttons or badges or clothing that depict a candidate on the ballot that day. It's got to be someone on the ballot that day. So if you want to wear a t-shirt or a ball cap from someone who ran for president 8 years ago or 20 years ago, that's great. Just not someone who's on the ballot tomorrow on election day. You can't wear their political clothing or paraphernalia. So that's just one of the examples of things that have been very successful in Minnesota in terms of setting expectations and making sure we get towards that oasis of calm in the polling place. I want to talk a little bit about election night. Our office, as always, will report election results as we get them from the counties. This is just a moment to remind folks, we don't count votes at the Office of Secretary of State. We never have, we probably never will. We don't touch anyone's paper ballot during the election process. That all happens in a spread out, decentralized way by design in thousands of places across Minnesota. In fact, it's our friends and neighbors who are doing the counting in individual communities. So we report the results that we get from the counties, and we expect that we'll be getting results fairly soon after polls close at 8 p.m. throughout the evening and the overnight hours. So I believe that in Minnesota, we should expect to have nearly all results in before folks sit down to breakfast on the morning of Wednesday, November 6th. That has been our standard over the years. Sometimes there are some outliers. It happens. There might be a county here or a county there that's a little bit late. But overall, if you look at the broad sweep of the past few years and decades, by the time Minnesotans are eating breakfast, they should know all or substantially all of the results in Minnesota. But I have to emphasize, particularly in light of the intensity around this election, that is not going to be the case in many states. And that's because their state laws build in extended counting. Again, in Minnesota, by breakfast, we're almost certainly going to have all or substantially all of the results. But that is not the case in a number of states, including presidential battleground states. So, for example, some states accept ballots that have been postmarked by Election Day. And other states have a rule where they can't even start counting absentee ballots until after the polls have closed. Again, there are several other states in these categories, and they are following their state's laws. So in these cases, results that are not available right after the close of polls is not proof of a problem. It is proof of the opposite, that they are dedicated election workers following the laws of their state. Now, I know this is a very important election for a lot of people, and I urge everyone to exercise patience. Our election officials are working tirelessly to ensure that the election is free, fair, secure, and accurate. And if results take a little longer, it's likely because of their commitment to accuracy, to crossing all the T's, and to dotting all the I's in accordance with the law. At this point, I'd like to hand it over to Acting Elections Director Paul Linnell, who will talk about the work his team is doing to prepare for November 5th. Paul.
Thank you, Secretary Simon. I'm Paul Linnell, and the Acting State Elections Director. Elections in Minnesota are administered locally by counties, cities, and township officials across the state. The Elections Division of the Office of the Secretary of State has been dedicated to ensuring that local election officials are trained, supported, and ready for Election Day. Elections take year-round preparations, and now we're entering the final stretch and putting these plans into action. We have completed more than 6 weeks of in-person voting and voting by mail leading up to the general election day. For the first time since the law was changed last year, there were additional evening hours, as well as a total of 3 weekend days of voting in every county across the state. This has expanded opportunities for voters, and Minnesotans are taking full advantage. As Secretary Simon noted, nearly 1.2 million voters have already cast their ballots in the election. Approximately 2/3 of those ballots have been cast in person at locations across the state. We've heard from voters and local election officials that early voting has gone very well, with high levels of enthusiasm and few incidents. Election officials have also been busy preparing and testing voting equipment for Election Day. Every piece of equipment that is used at the election has undergone testing to confirm that the equipment is counting ballots with 100% accuracy. Counties and municipalities have also held mandatory public tests to provide transparency and demonstrate the accuracy of the equipment. And after the election, selected precincts will be audited and hand counted to confirm that the ballots were counted accurately. Our voting equipment is tested, verified, and can be trusted. Over the past months, local election officials have also been busy recruiting, hiring, and training approximately 30,000 election judges that will work the polls tomorrow. Polling places will be fully staffed with well-trained election judges, ready to welcome the first voters into the polling place at 7 a.m. and to serve voters throughout the day until the close of polls at 8 p.m. All of those election judges and local election officials have been and will continue to work tirelessly to deliver another successful election. And today, we extend our gratitude and recognize them on National Election Hero Day. These election workers are the backbone of our elections infrastructure and are the biggest reason why we have safe, secure, accessible, and trusted elections in Minnesota. Now I want to take a minute to walk through the process that will take place at the end of the night to make election results available to the public. As Secretary Simon touched on the higher level, I want to go into some of the details of how that process will play out in Minnesota. So it starts at the polling place, where after the polls close, election judges are reviewing the voter check-ins against the ballots cast to ensure that those numbers are balanced, and they must be balanced. Results totals are then generated for that precinct, typically through the running and printing of a report from the voting equipment at the polling place. Election judges then return unofficial results to the county election office, either driven back or a small number of counties that use secure wireless modem transmissions. But before those results are posted, they must be combined with the absentee ballot totals for the precinct. And that process may take longer than usual. In 2023, the law was changed to allow absentee ballots to be returned up until the close of polls at 8 p.m. Like all absentee ballots, any that are returned on election day prior to the 8 p.m. deadline must first be reviewed by the absentee ballot board. If the ballot is accepted, the record is checked against the polling place rosters, as Secretary Simon noted, to confirm that the voter did not cast a ballot at the polling place. After those steps are completed, the absentee envelopes can be opened and the ballots are fed through a tabulator. Election officials prioritize accuracy and must ensure that all required steps are followed throughout this process, and it does take time. But once absentee totals and polling place totals are available for a precinct, the county can enter those results into the Secretary of State's secure election reporting system. From there, unofficial results are published to the Secretary of State's public election night results webpage and made available to the media for reporting. This information refreshes regularly at 10-minute intervals. In many counties, results are uploaded in batches of precincts after the absentee vote counting is completed. So it should not be surprising to see few results posted in the very early hours and minutes after the polls close on election night, and then to have several precincts' results appear all at once after absentee counting is finished and the results page is refreshed. These are not unexplained dumps of election results. Rather, it is an expected outcome based on the administrative procedures that are required to take place. As a reminder, results posted on election night are always unofficial. It is the summary statements from the polling place and absentee voting that comprise the official results. Those summary statements are reviewed closely and proofed in the days following the election to prepare the official results that will be certified by county canvassing boards and the state canvassing board in the days and weeks following the election. And with that, I will now turn it over to our election security navigator, Bill Ekblad.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning. I'm Bill Ekblad, the Election Security Navigator in the Office of the Secretary of State. I've been with the office since 2019. As we've previously mentioned in these briefings, our Election Security Navigator team partners closely with state and federal agencies and local election offices across Minnesota. Over the past year plus, we've all worked hard to track and prepare for a wide array of physical and cyber threats to our elections. Our federal partners, to include the FBI, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, and others, continue to tell us that both foreign and domestic bad actors are committed to disrupting American elections. Their efforts to sow misinformation and division through social media and other means have been well publicized in recent weeks, and we fully expect this activity to continue through tomorrow and beyond. To emphasize, though, we are not currently aware of any specific credible threats to Minnesota elections. Despite the disruptive efforts that I just mentioned by our adversaries, we do believe that the preparations done by Minnesota county and municipal election officials and the teams that support them have them ready for whatever might come. They've trained on what to look for. They've practiced how to respond, report, and call for help when needed. And most importantly, they continue to show the confidence and resilience needed to overcome whatever challenges may arise. One area we've really focused on is exactly who is authorized within a polling place. The only people who can be in a polling place are election workers, voters, or people who work at the polling location, be it a church, a school, an office, etc. State law only allows for polling place observers in the form of credentialed media and appointed challengers. Political parties and nonpartisan candidates can only appoint one challenger per precinct. The challenger must be a resident of Minnesota and can contest a voter's eligibility only if they have personal knowledge. So to wrap up, we know that the next few days will be a test of all that we and our local partners have put into election security preparations over the past few years. There are likely to be curveballs, surprises, and things we didn't see coming. However, we do believe strongly that the security relationships and partnerships we've built over the past several years will ensure Minnesota can once again enjoy safe and secure elections. And with that, I'll pass it over to our voter outreach director, Melanie Hazelip. Melanie?
Hello, I'm Melanie Hazelip, and I am the Voter Outreach Director. I've been with the office since 2022. As Secretary Simon said, we are really aiming to get back to our #1 spot in voter turnout for the nation. However, it will be harder for Minnesota to regain that #1 spot because, for a good reason, we've added 55,000 new Minnesotans as eligible voters and welcomed them back into our democracy. Now in Minnesota, anyone with a felony conviction has the right to vote. So as long as you are otherwise eligible, 18 years old, a US citizen, a Minnesota resident for at least 20 days, and not currently incarcerated for a felony offense, you have the right to vote. We're following the footsteps of more than 20 other states with this change, including our neighbors, North Dakota. We know a lot of these newly eligible voters don't know that their right has been restored. So please help us get the word out that in Minnesota, anyone on probation, parole, supervised release, work release, etc., has the right to vote. I also want to remind everyone of the new language resources available this year in polling places across the state. As of this year, polling places will have sample ballots and voting instructions in Spanish, Somali, and Hmong, the 3 most commonly spoken non-English languages. Some polling places may have additional resources available if they have enough voters speaking another language. Those precincts would have sample ballots and voting instructions in those languages. And if there are precincts that have reached a certain threshold of voters speaking another language, they would qualify for translation services in those polling places. I also want to remind everyone that our office has an elections call center that is up and running right now, currently taking calls. Voters can call our elections line to speak to a live member of our elections team. You always get a real person on the phone to answer any of your voting questions. Call 1-877-600-VOTE. That's 1-877-600-8683. And now, brand new, we also have a texting line this year. You can text 651-217-3862 and get a live person to text you back. You will not be added to any subscriptions or signed up for any distribution lists. You won't hear from us after you get your questions answered. The text line is just another way for Minnesota voters to get their voting questions answered. Again, that number is 651-217-3862. We also partner with the Minnesota Commission for the Deaf, Deafblind, and Hard of Hearing on an ASL call center. If you are in that community and have any questions about elections and voting, you can call their hotline. All of the specialists answering the phones there are deaf, deafblind, or hard of hearing and fluent in ASL. That number is 293-4288. So please use those numbers if you need any help as you go to vote today or tomorrow. You can vote tomorrow in person until 5 p.m. Today in person until 5 p.m. and tomorrow in person from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Even if you aren't registered to vote, Minnesota has same-day voter registration, whether you vote early in person or on election day. If you have a current Minnesota ID, that's all you need to bring with you to register same day. If your Minnesota ID is not up to date, perhaps you've moved or changed your name, you can go to our website, mnvotes.gov, to see a list of documents to bring with you to verify that you are who you say you are and you live where you say you live. And if you don't have a Minnesota ID, go to mnvotes.gov. There are still options. As Secretary Simon said, in Minnesota, we vote, and we really want to get back to that #1 spot. So make sure that not only you vote, but that your friends, families, and neighbors all vote too. And with that, I think we're ready for questions.
Hey, Mr. Secretary, can you first just give us the total, how many you have registered as of this moment?
Registered as of this moment. I'm going to defer to Paul. We can get you that number.
Somewhere around
Yeah.
3.5, 3.6 million, right? So you could have half the vote in half.
Well, we typically look at eligible voters, not necessarily registered, but yeah, that's the big question here: is what percentage does this represent? 1.174, memory serves, right? Does that represent a quarter? Does that represent a third? Does that represent something else? Just to give you the historical sort of pace. So, and COVID threw everything off in terms of the averages, but I'll give it anyway. So in 2018, 2 years before the pandemic, about 24% voted absentee, either in person or beforehand, or by mail, I should say, 24%. Then in 2020, that shot up to 58% of people voted that way. Sky high, just like most of the rest of the country. It came back down to earth in 2022 again at 26%. So if you take out COVID, which was an outlier, there has been a slow and steady increase. And so it seems like this number will ultimately come to represent something more than 26%, I'm guessing, because there's this kind of a slow and steady increase. Just a guess.
I mean, it could be at least a third.
It absolutely could be. It's hard to know. It's hard to know.
2016 early voting stats, this is about double
Yes.
what that was in 2016.
Yes.
What do you think is contributing to that?
A couple of things. Yeah, it's more than double. One is 2016 was the first presidential election where we had no excuses absentee voting. It was the second overall election, but the first presidential. So people were still getting acquainted with it. I think people, particularly during the pandemic, got a taste for it. There were a lot of people who otherwise wouldn't have considered it, who did. My wife and I, we always go to the polling places, but we didn't in 2020 for obvious reasons. It was COVID. We wanted to set that example. So I think it's a combination of things. People have acquired a taste for it, who maybe did it during the pandemic. That's my guess. And just the word has gotten out more among people that this is even a thing. This is something that they can do and that they're eligible to do.
What are you expecting of people coming to the polls to observe? And are there certain areas that you're particularly watching or concerned about, the people coming in and violating that rule?
You're referring to the challengers? Right. So as you heard, under Minnesota law, as Bill Ekblad said, our law is quite solid and quite specific. There are other states I could name but won't, where the law is murkier, less clear. Here, it's quite specific. You can't be within 100 feet of a polling place, the entrance of a polling place, excuse me, unless you meet the description that Bill read. One of the folks in that category is challengers. And as he said, there are rules there too, where they can stand, what they can do, etc. So we don't know of any particular place. And in some sense, that doesn't matter because election judges are trained on what conduct is appropriate and inappropriate, what is lawful and unlawful in the polling place. And they can resort, if necessary, to calling in law enforcement if someone is behaving in a way that is not consistent with the law. So I can't tell you it's going to be this area or that area that political party X or political party Y is planning to deploy people in this certain geographic area. I don't know that. They wouldn't necessarily share that or need to share that with us or anyone else. So I don't know that part. I do know, though, that the law is clear. It's a long-standing law. This is not a new thing. And election judges are well trained on spotting and dealing with any disruption in the polling place, whether it's from a challenger or anyone else.
Would you be able to give an update on Hennepin County's election board and how they do stuff?
You know, I might defer to Paul on that, the Hennepin County Election Board. Yeah, you're referring to the recent litigation. Right, go ahead. Do you want to share something about that?
Yeah, and having not followed up directly since the issuance of the court order, but the understanding in the statement issued by Hennepin County was that following the order, which was specific to the manner in which they appointed their election judges to serve on the absentee ballot board, to complete the required limited functions that election judges must do. They had both Democrat and DFL and Republican election judges on their ballot board, but it was the manner in which they were appointed that the court ruled that they needed to do differently. And so they had a November 1st deadline to comply with that. And it's my understanding that they are now in compliance with having appointed those election judges in the manner laid out by the Supreme Court.
How concerned are any of you about that issue of the absentee ballots and the open trunk, or some of the other things we've heard about being used to call results into question? Do you have concerns about that? I mean, I know that you've addressed all these issues as they've come up, but once we get into counting votes, obviously people will look for things that seem out of the ordinary to shed light on and raise questions. How concerned are you that's going to come up?
You know, it may come up. People sometimes will grasp at particular anecdotes, but I can tell you that this is a very durable, very resilient system and a very decentralized system. I keep wanting to emphasize that. I said before, I'll say again, we don't count votes ever. We don't touch anyone's ballot. That happens in thousands of places throughout the state. As I mentioned, these are very often our friends and neighbors doing the counting. And so there are particular anecdotes, and I've commented on them where they occur, whether it's the Edina situation or others. And what's unfortunate sometimes about those anecdotes is they tend to cast a shadow on the good work of the other 99.9% of people who are doing it right and correctly and thoroughly and lawfully. But I think Minnesotans have a base level of confidence in our election system. There were two recent polls you may have noted. Some of the outlets in this room were responsible for them. There was one that just came out last week from KSDP that showed 76% of Minnesotans have a base level of confidence in our election system. And there was one a week or two earlier from NPR, I believe, and the Star Tribune that showed 79%. It's hard to get 76 or 79% of people to agree on anything in a poll anymore. But they agreed on this, and that's a reflection of decades of work and many partners throughout the state. So I understand that some people will leverage particular anecdotes to generalize about the system, but I think the facts are different. And that overall, we have enjoyed in Minnesota elections that are fair, accurate, honest, and secure. Fortunately, I think the vast majority of Minnesotans agree with that. Not everybody does, but the vast majority do. And I think that ought to go a long way in making sure we can get to what I said, not just the high turnout, but the low drama. And when I talk about low drama, I'm not talking about low intensity or low energy or low passion. Of course, those are all justifiable and welcome and expected. We're electing the most powerful person on planet Earth. I think a little energy is called for. So it's not to say that people shouldn't express emotion. It's just we want things to go off well. We want ultimately to get to a place of acceptance of the results, no matter who wins. And I think we're headed in that direction. I'm cautiously optimistic.
Mr. Secretary, the governors in Washington and Nevada at least have activated certain units of the National Guard to provide backup. Are you aware of anything like that in Minnesota? Are there contingency plans for that to happen? As we knew from previous activations, it takes time sometimes to get folks moved. Do you know anything along those lines?
Right. Well, I would refer you to the governor's office in terms of any plans to do so or what the protocol is for doing so. I can tell you that we know of no existing imminent plan to call up and activate the Minnesota National Guard. As you mentioned correctly, that's always an option, but that's really the governor's call and the governor office.
I did ask the governor's office and he said, you would be the first to know, meaning me, so I've got that going. Can I ask Paul a question?
Yeah.
There's something you said about the combining of poll votes and absentee votes for each precinct on election night. And I guess I had thought that those might have been recorded separately, meaning a precinct has, or a county has a lot of absentee votes
period to run that those would be the first reported votes. And then the poll votes, even from the same precinct, would follow that. But it sounded like you said they have to wait until they can combine those before they post them publicly.
That's
Can you explain that?
That's exactly right. And it's a good question. And part of the reason to emphasize why things may take time after the close of polls, even if the voting equipment is producing the election results for that polling place, and if absentee totals, if they're still processing them, those two sets of results need to be combined, need to be married together before they're ever posted publicly. That is in the law, that absentee and polling place results cannot be reported separately. So until you have those two pieces of data together, the results for a specific precinct will not be posted. So once you see them starting to go up, you know that that does include absentee and polling place results for that particular precinct.
So there's no way for people to know, we've all been looking at the who's voted. And the polling says that the vast majority of those who say they have voted early are DFL voters. But is there any way we can find out after an election how the early vote voted versus how the election night vote voted?
It's not something that is posted in the results that we push out publicly. In the abstracts of results, you'll have the statistics certainly of who had voted within each counting group, but the results totals in the certified abstracts are combined between absentee and polling place results.
The only thing I would add to that, I think a helpful reminder is, remember, in Minnesota, we don't have party registration. There are states who have been able to say, because they do track this, hey, so far with the early vote, it's this many Democrats or this many Republicans, not who they voted for, but what the sort of political complexion. We don't have that ability because we're one of the 18 states, we're in the minority, one of the 18 states with no party registration. You just register to vote here. You don't register as a Democrat or a Republican or anything. So that's another factor making it difficult for us to track that sort of thing.
You mentioned the state's ban on wearing clothing advocating for a specific candidate or not. You said that the distinction was that it had to be somebody on the city's ballot. What about something like a red "Make America Great Again" cap?
This comes up. Maybe I'll defer to Paul on that one again. And this came up in 2016. What if someone has an "I'm with her" t-shirt, right? Which was commonly understood to be a reference to Hillary Clinton, but it didn't say Hillary Clinton on it. Do you want to talk about that, Paul?
So, yeah, and I think in light of the US Supreme Court decision and then the clarifying legislation that was passed last year, which specifically cites whether it's a candidate or a slogan or a party name. So something that is a slogan that is directly associated with the candidate would be, I think, considered to fall within the scope of that ban on campaign apparel. So something that is used by the campaign would be within the right of someone at a polling place to ask that person to remove that as campaign apparel.
Could you just explain the challenges per precinct? I'm a little confused on that part of the law. How you say there was one challenger per precinct?
Right.
Can you just explain what that is and
Sure.
the comments afterwards?
Sure. So the parties, political parties are able to appoint a challenger to serve within a specific precinct. So it's both parties can have their challenger within that polling place. They have to present a letter signed by the party chair to show to the election judges that they are authorized to be there. But that limit of one per party ensures that it's a small number of persons that are going to be there and that they're authorized to be within that polling place. But there's no limit to the number of precincts, polling places across the state that a party may wish to appoint their challengers to be in the polling place.
And so what would they be challenging?
So the way the statute works, and it's very specific that they must have personal knowledge about a voter's eligibility. So they may challenge and say, I personally know that person is not eligible to vote in this precinct. And that is the extent of their role within the polling place.
Identifiable. Do they have a badge that says challenger or a lanyard or something?
I'd have to check to see if there is something that specifically requires identification, but certainly if asked, the election judges have the ability to designate where that challenger is located within the polling place. They're not allowed to speak to voters. They're not allowed to freely roam wherever they wish. It's really a defined place where the head judge has the authority to determine where that challenger is located in a spot that's close enough to the check-in and registration table so that they may be able to perform their role and challenge voters if they wish to do so.
Everybody else is identifiable by a badge of some sort.
Right, the election judges will have identification within the polling place as well. Yeah.
So is it right then that these challengers, the grounds that they would have for challenging somebody would be pretty narrow? It's like, I know for certain that this person does not live in this precinct.
It's very narrow, and it must be based on that personal knowledge piece. It can't be a hunch. It can't be suspicion. The challenger has to have direct personal knowledge that that person is not eligible to
Do
vote.
they provide proof of that?
So the way the challenge process would work is that they would present the challenge to the election judges, and the election judges would then walk through the challenge process with the voter, where they have the opportunity to affirm and certify and attest, yes, I am eligible to vote. And if they're able to clear that challenge, then they are allowed to vote in that precinct.
And how common is that process? I mean, does that come up a lot?
I would say anecdotally, it's very rare that voters would be challenged.
Have you seen an increase in people like applying to be challengers this year, or is it nothing?
As Secretary Simon said, I don't know that we're always briefed on how many challengers the parties might plan to deploy. So I'm not sure whether it would be more or less than in previous elections.
Cybersecurity threats you mentioned earlier about what are some of the things that you and some of the other state partners are specifically monitoring and concerned about heading into election?
Certainly, the topic of cybersecurity as it relates to elections is not new. It's probably the most mature of the threat streams that we've been paying attention to going back to the 2016 presidential election. I think the current form of cyber activity that dominates the election landscape is the misinformation that we're all becoming more familiar with. So that's a little bit of the softer side, if you will, of cybersecurity. Specific adversary actions directed against networks and so forth. Those things do still happen. Our partners do a great job of both making us aware and protecting us from those things. But I think when we think cyber domain in the current context of this year's election, it really is an emphasis on the mis and disinformation that's playing out, as you've all become familiar with recent headlines and the activity that's been in the media.
Kind of coordinated all with the Attorney General, who set up this phone line and this security line for people to call with concerns or complaints. Last time I checked, they hadn't received any. Are you aware of any activity on their side?
Yeah, we do collaborate with them quite closely on these matters, and we're advised of their creation of this number. Of course, what I tell people is you can certainly call that number if you've observed something that is disturbing or unusual. What will probably practically happen in that case, and in most cases, is they will then turn to us, because it's not always a law enforcement issue. It's very often, probably most often, an election administration issue. So it would be a case of us contacting a county or city head of elections, and then maybe at a subsequent level getting law enforcement involved. So we're working with them on that. This is sort of a belt and suspenders approach, right? They have a number, and there are a lot of people who would want to trust the Attorney General's office with letting them know about a particular incident, particularly if it's an incident of a voter being somehow prevented from voting or interference with the voter's ability to vote. But again, as you heard, we have our toll-free number as well, where people can call them as well. And we're talking with each other.
You had mentioned you want to win, and apply, we need to win back our best turnout. Did someone surpass us, or are you just hoping to, again, claim the crown?
Sadly, in 2022, nothing lasts forever. After 3 times in a row as number one, the state of Maine did surpass us. I have a teasing ongoing dialogue with my colleague in the state of Maine. So we hope that will not happen, and we hope that we are back at number one, just as nature intended, after this election year. So, but honestly, a lot of other states have really upped their game. It's not that we declined in any way at all. It's that other states have really upped their game, and that's good. That's a win-win. But we're aiming for number one, which is where we were before 2022 for 3 times in a row, and that's what we're hoping for.
Is Maine even a state?
Supposedly, yes.
Is there a reward or some kind of
There should be. Not that I know of, just bragging rights, I guess. I'd be all for that, though.
Thanks for your time.
Any other questions?
Anyone else? Okay. Thank you. Thanks all.
I don't know if they'll tell us the registration. Like I said, you're not
Streaming.
No, I don't.
But if you show from your I want to start with this.
You
just said eligible voter is invited.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
As far as what I know the numbers of number of voters. I need that number.